The wrestling world just exploded with news that nobody saw coming, and honestly it feels like we're living in some alternate reality where the impossible keeps happening. Reigns and Seth Rollins are back together and the Shield music might actually hit again sooner than anyone expected. But before we dive into this absolute chaos, let me tell you something that's going to blow your mind even more, because what's happening behind the scenes is 10 times crazier than what you're seeing on your screen. If you love wrestling like I do, then you need to hit that subscribe button right now, because we're about to unpack the biggest stories that could change everything you thought you knew about this business. Reigns and Seth Rollins standing side by side again isn't just a moment for nostalgia, it's a nuclear bomb dropped right in the middle of WWE's current landscape. These two men who have spent years tearing each other apart both physically and emotionally are now being forced to confront a threat so massive that their personal issues have to take a back seat. The Vision, as they're being called, represents something entirely new in professional wrestling, and it's not just another faction trying to make noise. This group has been systematically dismantling everything that the old guard built, and they're doing it with a precision that's honestly terrifying to watch. When you see guys like Reigns and Rollins, who have carried this company on their backs for the better part of a decade, having to join forces, you know the situation has gone from serious to absolutely critical. The chemistry between Reigns and Rollins never really died, it just went dormant under layers of betrayal and bruised egos. When they were part of the Shield alongside Dean Ambrose, who we now know as Jon Moxley, they revolutionized tag team wrestling and created a blueprint that every faction since has tried to copy. Their synchronized attacks, their military precision, and their ability to read each other in the ring was something special that you don't see very often in this industry. Now, with both of them in completely different places in their careers, the question isn't whether they can work together again, but whether they can put aside everything that's happened between them long enough to survive what's coming. Reigns has evolved into this final boss character who believes he's untouchable, and Rollins has reinvented himself so many times that you'd need a history book to keep track of all his personas. What makes this reunion so compelling is that neither man is doing this because they want to. They're doing it because they have to, and that desperation creates a completely different dynamic than what we saw during the Shield's original run. Back then they were young, hungry, and had everything to prove as they fought their way up from developmental. Now they're established stars with massive egos and completely different visions for what WWE should be. Reigns has spent the last few years building this bloodline empire and positioning himself as the undisputed head of the table, while Rollins has been the workhorse, fighting anyone anywhere and constantly reinventing what it means to be a top guy. Forcing these two alphas to work together is like trying to mix oil and water, except the entire building is on fire and they have no choice but to figure it out. The Vision isn't just another group of talented wrestlers looking to make a name for themselves. They represent a fundamental shift in how modern wrestling factions operate, and their approach is calculated, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. They don't care about tradition, they don't care about respect, and they certainly don't care about the legends who came before them. Their whole philosophy is built on the idea that the old way of doing things is dead and it's time for a complete revolution. When a group like that starts targeting the biggest names in the company, you can't just send one person to deal with them, no matter how talented that person might be. You need a united front, and you need people who understand how to work as a cohesive unit, which is exactly why the Shield reunion makes so much sense, even if it seems impossible on paper. The backstage politics surrounding this whole situation are absolutely wild and give you a glimpse into how complicated wrestling really is behind the curtain. There are reports floating around that suggest this wasn't WWE's first choice for how to handle the Vision storyline, but circumstances forced their hand in ways nobody anticipated. Injuries, contract negotiations, and personal issues have created this perfect storm where the only logical solution was to bring back one of the most iconic partnerships in wrestling history. Some people in the back are thrilled about this development because they know it's going to do massive business and create moments that fans will talk about for years. Others are concerned that relying on nostalgia, even nostalgia this powerful, might send the wrong message about WWE's ability to create new stars and fresh storylines. Roman Reigns has been operating at a level that most wrestlers never reach, and his character work over the past few years has been nothing short of masterful. He's not just playing a bad guy, he's playing the final boss of wrestling, and every single thing he does reinforces that image. From his entrance to his promos to the way he controls the pace of his matches, everything is calculated to make you believe that he's on a completely different level than everyone else. Bringing him back into a partnership even temporarily threatens to undermine some of that aura, because it suggests that even the tribal chief needs help sometimes. But that's also what makes this story so interesting, because it forces Reigns to show vulnerability in a way that his character normally wouldn't allow. Seth Rollins, on the other hand, has always been the guy who's willing to do whatever it takes to steal the show. He's had more character changes than almost anyone in modern WWE, and each time he commits to it completely, whether he's playing a cult leader, a messiah figure, or a flamboyant showman who dresses like he raided a costume shop. His matches are always entertaining, and his willingness to work with anyone has made him one of the most valuable players in the entire company. The idea of him setting aside his own ambitions to team with Reigns again is fascinating, because Rollins has spent so much time trying to step out of the Shield's shadow and establish his own identity. Going back to that, well, even temporarily feels like a regression, except in this case it might be the only way forward. The timing of this reunion couldn't be more interesting, because it's happening at a moment when WWE is trying to balance honoring its past while also building toward the future. The company has been criticized for relying too heavily on part-time legends and nostalgia acts, but when those nostalgia acts involve people who are still in their prime and can deliver at the highest level, it's a completely different conversation. Reigns and Rollins aren't past their expiration date, they're arguably better now than they've ever been, which means this isn't just a cheap pop for old fans, it's a legitimate main event level storyline that could shape the entire direction of the company for the next year. Then you have the AJ Styles situation, which is somehow flying under the radar despite being absolutely massive news. AJ Styles potentially going to AEW is the kind of move that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago, but in today's wrestling landscape nothing is off the table anymore. Styles has been with WWE for years now and he's accomplished pretty much everything there is to accomplish in that company. He's been world champion multiple times, he's main event WrestleMania, and he's proven that he can work with anyone and make them look like $1 million. But lately there have been signs that he's not entirely happy with his position, and when a talent of that caliber starts feeling underutilized, you can bet that other companies are paying attention. AEW has made it clear that they're interested in signing top-tier talent, and Styles fits that description perfectly. He's got name recognition, he's got credibility, and he's still working at an incredibly high level despite being in his 40s. The matches he could have in AEW are absolutely mind-blowing to think about, and the creative freedom he would get there might be exactly what he needs at this stage of his career. But leaving WWE isn't a decision you make lightly, especially when you've been there as long as Styles has and built the kind of legacy that he's built. There are financial considerations, family considerations, and the simple reality that WWE is still the biggest wrestling company in the world by a significant margin. What makes the Styles situation even more complicated is that WWE reportedly doesn't want to let him go, and they're willing to make significant offers to keep him around. The question is whether those offers involve the kind of creative opportunities that Styles is looking for, or if they're just throwing money at the problem and hoping it goes away. Styles has made it clear in interviews that at this point in his career he cares more about having meaningful matches and storylines than he does about collecting paychecks. If WWE can't provide that environment, then AEW becomes a much more attractive option regardless of the money involved. Then there's the Reed situation, which, depending on who you talk to, is either a massive error or a calculated risk that could pay off huge. Bronson Reed has been positioned as this unstoppable monster and his matches have been brutal in the best possible way. But somewhere along the line there was a miscommunication or a creative decision that didn't land the way it was supposed to, and now there are questions about whether his push is going to continue or if WWE is going to pivot in a different direction. These kinds of errors happen all the time in wrestling because there are so many moving parts and so many people involved in the creative process, but when they happen to someone who's on the verge of breaking through to the next level, it can be devastating. Reed's whole character is built on being this force of nature that can't be stopped, and any sign of weakness or confusion in how he's being presented threatens to undermine everything they've built. The good news is that Reed is talented enough to recover from pretty much anything as long as WWE commits to him and gives him the right opportunities. The bad news is that in modern WWE there are only so many spots at the top of the card, and competition for those spots is absolutely fierce. One mistake or one poorly executed storyline can be the difference between becoming a main eventer and getting stuck in the midcard forever. What all three of these stories have in common is that they represent the chaotic, unpredictable nature of professional wrestling in the modern era. Nothing is guaranteed, nothing is set in stone, and what seems impossible one day can become reality the next. The Shield reunion happening now with everything that's gone down between Reigns and Rollins feels surreal, but it's happening. AJ Styles potentially leaving WWE after everything he's accomplished there seems crazy, but it's a real possibility. Bronson Reed's push hitting a snag right when momentum was building is frustrating, but it's part of the business. This is why wrestling fans can never truly step away, because you never know what's going to happen next, and the storylines both in front of and behind the camera are constantly evolving. The wrestling business has always been about adapting to circumstances and making the best of whatever situation you're handed. Sometimes that means reuniting bitter rivals to fight a common enemy. Sometimes it means watching a legend consider jumping ship to a competitor. Sometimes it means dealing with creative errors and trying to get things back on track. All of these situations require flexibility, creativity, and a willingness to take risks, because playing it safe in wrestling rarely leads to anything special. The companies and performers who succeed are the ones who can roll with the punches and turn potential disasters into opportunities. As we watch all of this unfold over the coming weeks and months, the most important thing is to remember that wrestling works best when it feels unpredictable and exciting. The Shield reunion works because it's something fans have wanted for years but never thought would actually happen. The AJ Styles situation works because it creates genuine uncertainty about the future and forces you to consider possibilities you hadn't thought about before. The Reed situation works because it reminds us that even in a scripted medium things don't always go according to plan, and that chaos can lead to interesting places if handled correctly. So if you're as invested in all of this as I am, then make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because we're going to be covering every development, every twist, and every surprise as this story continues to unfold. The wrestling world is moving faster than ever, and you don't want to miss a single moment of what's shaping up to be one of the most interesting periods in recent memory. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment letting me know what you think about all these developments, and get ready because things are only going to get crazier from here.